Welcome back to our last week of our virtual course. I think today feels really bittersweet, probably for a lot of us, that it's coming to an end, and we've so enjoyed our time together over the last 6 weeks. And today we're going to be talking with you about self-care. So hopefully you were able to bring an item of self-care with you today, whether that's a warm drink or a cozy blanket or something nice to snack on. So I'm starting today's session by acknowledging that I'm joining you today on lands that have been occupied by First Nations for millennia, lands rich in civilizations. And to acknowledge this traditional territory is to recognize its longer history, one predating the establishment of the earliest European colonies. So I also acknowledge this territory's significance for the Indigenous people who lived and continue to live on it and whose practices and spiritualities are tied to the land. And I think I spoke a bit about this last week, that it's important to acknowledge this land, but also to recognize that that's only a first step, that this is really a continuous process and one that requires action, accountability, and a commitment to really stand in solidarity. So today, I invite us to think about ways we can begin that sort of ongoing and continual process of acting in solidarity with Indigenous people in Canada, whether that's to learn more about the history of colonization, to build relationships with Indigenous centers or associations in your area, or whether that's to act really and be accountable toward Indigenous people and communities. Okay, so today on the topic of self-care, we're going to talk about what we know about caregiver mental health and well-being during the pandemic. We're going to bring back the HELP model, which you may recall that we introduced in our first session together, and apply it to our own well-being. And then we're going to share some strategies around staying strong, calm, and connected. So, research. So what do we know, I guess, about sort of caregiver well-being, both before and after the pandemic? So the research tells us about the well-being of caregivers who have a loved one with a developmental disability. So we know before the pandemic that really generally caregivers of people with developmental disabilities experience poorer mental health, so higher rates of things like depression and anxiety, poorer physical health, greater financial problems, more stress, more crisis, and higher rates of marital difficulties. And that was all before the pandemic. So if we think about since the onset of the pandemic a year ago, all of those things I just mentioned have really been exacerbated. And I think, as we've all talked about over the course of the last 6 weeks, and as all of you've shared with us, since the pandemic, many of you have experienced more limited access to supports for your loved one outside of your family and outside of your home, the need to sort of wear multiple hats or, juggle multiple roles, whether that's, therapist, teacher, advocate, recreation director, all of that alongside juggling your own needs, possibly your own job, your own self-care, whether that's your mental health, your physical health, as well as in many cases supporting other members of your family, other children, your parents. So for many of you, you also shared since the start of the pandemic, really having to sort of quickly reestablish new norms and new routines. And now for almost a year, carrying out those new routines. So while I'm sure none of this is new information to you, I think it's important to acknowledge that, and to acknowledge that this is a really, really difficult time for caregivers, and understandably so. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this visual, but I think it's important to recognize that it's normal in a situation of a lot of uncertainty and stress, like a pandemic, to feel really exhausted, to experience ups and downs, and to feel sort of, depleted or burned out. And this visual that's up on the screen now is sort of highlighting how our body responds to stress. So if you think about some of the, worried thoughts you might be having, like, what if I get COVID? What if my loved one gets COVID? What if my loved one ends up in the hospital without me? So these kinds of worried thoughts send signals to our body to release hormones, which signal to our brain that we might be in danger and sort of activate that fight or flight response. And this is actually our body's kind of innate natural reaction to danger, to alert us. And our brains are sort of constantly updating our world, making those judgments about what's safe and what isn't. And when we think about that sort of from an evolutionary perspective, it's actually been quite helpful and adapted. It's protected us and enabled us to survive. But if we think about it in the context of COVID, where we're in this really prolonged state of fear and uncertainty, it's not like we can, flee or fight the situation and move on. Instead, we're sort of left in this state of this hyper arousal in this cycle for many months, for a year. So when we think about what are some of the short-term implications of that, and I'm sure many of us have experienced this. So things like, feeling really tired, feeling forgetful or distracted. Some people experience skin reactions like hives or stomach problems, headaches, feeling more irritable. I'm sure probably all of us have experienced some of those symptoms. And then, longer term, this kind of state can, in some people, lead to more serious issues like depression, anxiety, chronic fatigue, in some cases, physical health issues. But the point of this slide is not to completely overwhelm or frighten you, but I think it's really just to highlight that we are in a very challenging and unusual time. Hopefully there's some light at the end of the tunnel with this vaccine, but also there's some really good news to share today around some strategies that can help us as we navigate this uncertain time. And Lee is going to start us off with some of those strategies based on your own experience and sharing with us next.
Thanks, Joanna. So, we would like to know what you've been doing to counteract the effects of stress in your life. So let's start with your experience in our last breakout room of this series. Welcome back. So if you could just take a few seconds and write in the chat function, whoever took some notes in your little group about what are some of the things that you've been doing that makes it a good day. And I think Amy said it really well that sometimes I'm doing well when I know my loved one's doing well, no matter how much I do. If it's not having a good day, it's really important I continue to look after myself, but it does make it harder. Yeah, so look at these sunshine and making sure our loved ones are cared for so that then we can focus on ourselves. Journaling, baking, playing silly games, love it. Walking, getting outside, binge watching that Amy asked us about earlier. Yeah. Oh, bread baking too. Someone else, Yona's bread baking, walking, reading, connecting with others, it's so nice to see the spring weather. I think just all that extra sun, and as Tiz said at the beginning, hearing the bird song. So all kinds of suggestions of things that we've been doing. Good night's sleep, boy, is that ever true? So I see some really common themes of things that people have been trying over this past year. Look at what a resilient group we are, that we've learned from all these years, but also just how we've survived this unusual time. Thanks everybody for participating in that. I just want to talk about the HELP model. That was our very first session, and we were talking about it in terms of our loved one and applying the HELP model. And if you remember, it's H stands for health. So that's things like we were talking about, the health of our loved one, but also, are we, keeping up with seeing our own doctor or dentist as that becomes available? As you said in the chat function, going to bed, like I was going to bed really late just to have some time to myself, but getting a good night's sleep is really making a difference. And then I can wake up a little bit easier, and especially during the nicer weather coming. Eating, I either was eating way too much. I think I was eating, like stuffing down my feelings and overeating. But for some people, it's, eating less or just not having an appetite. And of course, we all talked about that importance of exercise. Just getting up from the computer, even if we're sitting on the computer too often, like setting a timer to get up and move even once every 30 minutes or hour. So that's the H, just to thinking about our own health and well-being. And then environment, if you remember, it's that's, around us. We talked about our loved ones, and it's changed significantly for us too. When with our loved ones sort of collapse of their routines and their programs, it really fell to many of us to keep them engaged. And if your loved one has been in a group home, unable to visit and monitor their well-being the way that we were used to doing, and just having fewer breaks. If there's more people at home, if other loved ones have moved back home, just having that, not having the breaks or less time for ourselves. So our environment has really changed, and thinking about ways that we can take that precious time back, even at the beginning or end of the day. And L stood for lived experience. And remember, we were talking about for our loved ones that a moment isn't just that moment. It's usually a cascade of memories and other times when we felt overwhelmed or fearful or sad. And other times when our loved one was in pain, and we remembered that and what we did. And I think L for me too is listening to ourselves, to our bodies, and whether or not we have someone to listen to us as we go through it. But it's nice. It's been really helpful to me, even just to reach out to one friend who understands and shares a similar lived experience right now. And then finally, the P was, we were talking about, when did our loved ones need professional support for their mental health? But the same is true for us. And we'll talk about that a little bit more today. So that's the help model as we think about it, as it applies to us. So in this case, just talking about the H, the physical health, during the pandemic, just jotting down, like, what are some of the things that you're not doing and that you'd maybe like to build in, or give yourself a pat on the back, sort of, if you have been doing it. So, just some of the, give you the focus of some of the things that you could work on, or, picking something easy, super easy, just one small change that you could make in terms of your physical well-being. For example, I keep saying I want to get more exercise. I keep saying that. And so, I'm just going to do one little thing. I've got an egg timer. I'm setting it for once an hour. I'm going to stand up and stretch. And I'm going to, now with the nice weather, try to get out before I, make a special time once a day and kind of stick to it. Even if I do that 3 times a week, just something small that I can do. And, so I'm just inviting you to sort of think for yourself, what are some of those ways that we can look after our physical health? So Joanna, do you want to go next about staying calm?
Thanks, Lee. So yes, thank you, Lee, for sharing those ideas around how to sort of stay strong and physically healthy during the pandemic. And now we're going to talk about some ways to stay calm or sort of mentally healthy, but keeping in mind that really those two things very much overlap. So the tips on this slide may not be new or surprising to you. And I think from what we've been hearing in the chat and the polls over the last few weeks, I know that many of you are already doing some of these things. But I think, as Lee shared, even if we can do 1 or 2 of these things, or do some of these things in a really small way, it can make a big difference. So routine, we talked about this before for your loved one, but it's also really important for you, for us, as much as possible, to try to keep somewhat of a regular routine to our days, whether that's creating a new one, including exercise or movement. And that can be, going on a walk, doing an exercise video, having a dance party, and remembering Natasha's sharing from a few weeks ago about that really powerful relationship between regular exercise and mood. she shared that exercising for 30 minutes, 3 days a week, is as effective as medication in treating mild to moderate depression. Um, so also finding ways to incorporate time outside, and finding ways to add meaning to our days. And we talked about this, if you remember that little schedule, that routine, that had those different components. Um, and that meaning can be, whatever's important to you, whether that's your work, volunteering, helping a neighbor, tackling a project in your home, baking bread, doing a craft, as some of you shared, learning a new skill, or doing an activity with your loved one. So just finding ways to add meaning. The next point, I think, is a hard one. If you can accept that some things are out of our control, and I think control is really at a premium right now because we are surrounded by a lot of unknowns and what ifs. But the sooner we can sort of accept the things we can't control, the more energy we will have for the things that we can. And as a caregiver, this might mean accepting, that the routine you used to have with your loved one or the routine that they used to have isn't possible right now. So finding a new, more flexible routine. It might also mean that we don't know how long some of the measures that are in place will last, like how long we're going to be wearing masks or distancing, or even when some of us will get the vaccine. The third point, I think, is a really important one, acknowledging, and I think I shared this a bit at the beginning, that this is a really difficult time, and being gentle with ourselves. From some of the information that I shared earlier, but also from what you've shared over the past 6 weeks, I think we can all acknowledge that this is a really challenging time for caregivers. And in acknowledging that, allowing some compassion for ourselves, that we're doing our best in a really highly unusual and difficult time. And when things don't go as we hoped or as we planned, which I think is something we can all relate to, we can learn from it, and we can move forward. And Lee shared a little bit about this already, but drawing on our past resilience. I think being a caregiver takes incredible resilience. So really reminding ourselves of that and reflecting on our journey, what's happened in our life that's taken us up to this point, and reminding ourselves of everything we've overcome to get here. And while COVID is certainly sort of an unprecedented disruption, it's important to remember that as caregivers, this isn't the first time we've had to adjust our routines. In fact, caregivers are probably more adaptable than most people. So take comfort in the knowledge that you've proven your ability to really withstand some pretty incredible challenges. Next point around staying connected and maintaining social networks as much as you can, even though it's a difficult time to do that, even if it's just with a few close friends or family, whether that's virtually or in person. We know from research just how powerful and important social support is to our mental health and well-being. And Amy's going to speak a little bit more on that shortly. And then I think this last point about attending to our needs and feelings, trying to engage in activities that bring us happiness, whether that's doing something on your own or doing something with your loved one or with someone else, going for a walk, reading, listening to music, enjoying a movie or a Netflix series. And as Lee, I think, really beautifully shared with us during our session on grief and loss, making space for feelings, even the painful ones. Because just like that beach ball analogy that Lee shared, pushing those feelings down sort of only means they're going to pop up somewhere else. So those are just a few strategies to keep in mind around staying calm. And I think Amy's going to share a really great strategy in the next slide.
Wow, Gianna, it's just so incredibly affirming to hear that, because I think we often, especially you talk about the idea of resilience, and we are resilient, and we've gone through so much over the years, and that's just really wonderful to hear. And so talked about a lot of things to keep in mind for our health and mental health. And I want to give a story of, I too have been trying to have some routines, but sometimes we really need to look at, does that need tweaking a little bit? So here's a story. Several months ago, My evening routine was I would watch the evening news at night because my daughter would go to bed around 9:30 or 10, and it was time for me. So I'd sit with my husband and older daughter, and we would watch the news, and all these would be flooded with these images of horrible things happening in the world and hospitalizations and negative news. And I could just feel my anxiety going up and up and up. So what I have to do, I have to actually watch more TV. So I'd stay up even later and I'd watch Schitt's Creek, which I know is a big hit in the chat box, and things like that. And before I knew it, it was midnight. Anybody sound familiar to anyone? Would finally get to bed, read a little bit, be 1 in the morning, then have insomnia. So that worked well. And then when I woke up the next morning, first thing I did was check my phone, check my email for all these things I was supposed to be doing, and of course see the news to see if anything had miraculously changed for better or worse overnight, right? So as a result, I was starting and I was ending my day in a really anxious kind of way. So from a few months ago, I did make some changes, and this is called bookending. How do you start and how do you end your day? So what I do now in the morning, rather than rushing for my email and phone and finding out what's going on in the world, I sit in bed and I have a calm cup of coffee. I also pick up the fiction that I'm reading and I read a few pages of that. And the third thing I do is, I know maybe some of you have kept a gratitude journal, but I don't have a lot of energy for anything. But what I have is a blank book, and I call it 3 things. So I jot down first thing in the morning, 3 things I noticed from the day before that were positive or happy or made me smile. And you may go, wow, sounds great that you can have coffee in bed. I have a son or daughter to take care of. Yeah, I get it. I do too. But it might be 5 or 10 minutes you're doing this. It might be that you wake up a little bit earlier, but I found that made a huge difference. And as far as evening, bookending the night, I don't really watch news at all anymore, maybe once a week, and I'm trying to get to bed earlier. And again, I'm reading at night because that's something I really, really enjoy. So you look at all these ideas of taking care of ourselves, you look at a really tangible thing that we can tweak is bookending. How do you start and end your day? So maybe if you want to mention how you start or end your day in the chat, and if that works for you, and if it doesn't, is that something you want to tweak a little bit? So you want to just take a second, put that in the chat. How do you start and end your day? Is that working? Or you might tweak it. Lots of great ideas, learning, audiobooks. Several people talked about meditation and faith groups. So some people are going to online services in church or synagogue or temple, or reading about in faith groups, which is another really big part that is worth mentioning as well, if that's something that's meaningful for you. Birds, backyard birds, that's quite a joy as well. And it looks like most people have a pretty a bookending start and end to their day that they're happy with. A few people are talking about tweaking it a little bit.
So it's really lovely to read these, Amy, because, segueing to, mindfulness, so many of the things that people are listing are things that they're bringing their full attention to.
Okay, so we talked about the strategy of bookending, and people have some really fabulous ideas. And then we're going to talk about a lot of some other activities that you're probably already doing, but a bit of a story. And I can't see you here, but are any of you ukulele players? Any ukulele fans? So when the pandemic started a year ago, just before everything was locked down, my dear husband went out, ran to a music store, and he bought me a ukulele and a Learn to Play Ukulele book. And that's something I've always wanted to do. I was pretty excited. And that night I went online, I looked on YouTube, and I taught myself some notes, and it was great. And quite honestly, I haven't picked it up since. I have not touched it. So here's the thing. And the good news is, as you know, there's things we can do to make ourselves feel energized and positive and soothed. And we know these kinds of activities from a mental health point of view can do a lot to alleviate anxiety. So that's something, so it might be not realistic for you to do something like play ukulele But I think the other thing I've been doing a lot of reading and thinking about is the idea of we want to stay calm, but we want to be happy. We want to try and stay positive and our families. And so much of regular life has the idea of novelty and mastery. So maybe you would go out to a play, or you would meet your friends at a new restaurant, or you would go to a new park, this whole idea of novelty. And how do we create that idea of playfulness and novelty and trying something new in this pandemic life? So maybe that's something to kind of play around and think about as well. So I want you to start to think about what activities make you feel energized. And these would be things that some of you have mentioned already, like walking or exercising, or even cleaning out a drawer, or cooking. And again, if you want to play around with novelty, I've just been playing around with trying to cook things I've never cooked before. If you like to walk, can you go to a place you've never been before? So trying to get that idea of novelty and some joy. And then what are some of the things you do that are soothing activities? And these are also really powerful for our mental health. So you lucky people that have cats or dogs, just cuddling your cat and dog is an incredibly soothing activity, or knitting, or just sitting and breathing, or sitting with a cup of tea, anything like that. So if you can just put in the chat box something that you regularly do that makes you feel energized or soothed. Great. Music, Zumba, dancing, bath. Looks like several people are learning new languages as well, trying new places, cardio, staycation. Oh, that's interesting. Painting your home and switching bedrooms with your son. Wonderful. Just wanted to add, several people talked about doing online learning. I wonder if everyone has heard of Coursera. So C-O-U-R, like course, I'll type it in. You can audit all these courses for free, and they are from American colleges and university, and it's everything from music to languages. It's pretty fantastic. So if that's something that appeals to you and you can do it at your own pace, just check it out. It's called Coursera. I could look it up to get the exact thing. The Laurie Santos course, and I think someone mentioned it, it was a science of well-being and science of happiness is excellent as well. And you can do it at your at what time works for you. And she has very specific things that are research based to improve happiness each week. It was quite interesting, but I was a bit of a dropout. It felt like one more online thing for me.
Amy, can I go on
Yes.
to the next slide then? Thank you.
Yes.
So we've done mindfulness every week, and I guess what I want to say is, mindfulness, the definition of sort of mindfulness in the Western world is just bringing your full attention to the present moment, and you do that on purpose. And so there's so many ways you've already been sharing how you've been doing things mindfully. And I think that's what really important to know, that there's like, a specific time you can set for yourself during the day to do a mindfulness practice. And there's so many right now, but we have an incredible mindfulness teacher at the Israeli Center, Sue Hutton, who has made wonderful mindfulness exercises that we can do, that she specifically has created for caregivers. So we'll share the link in our summary pages about that. But also just to know that mindfulness is really research based, that Yona and her team did research comparing how much caregivers benefited from taking a mindfulness course, from just taking a workshop on resources. And many of us have taken those kinds or workshops on how to help our loved one. But the mindfulness research that Yona and her team have been doing at the Israeli Center has really proven that mindfulness is so beneficial for caregivers. It increases our well-being, and it can really help reduce our stress. And it's been shown to decrease our, for depression, anxiety. And I know for myself, it just has been very, very helpful. And I just try to incorporate mindfulness or just bringing my attention to the present moment in ways that don't add anything extra to my day really as well. So what I mean by that is that, you know, before I even get out of bed, just noticing my breath and just feeling like taking 5 deep breaths. And Sue Hutton, who I was saying is a mindfulness teacher, she has 30 years of experience, explained to us that, you know, it stimulates this nerve that goes right from the brain into our gut, the vagus nerve. And it just, I can feel a calmness come when I just take those deep sort of cleansing breaths. We can do what we talked about earlier, where we just notice the sound. So we can notice the sound in the room, but as we go for a walk, like, can we notice the bird calls, or the sound of our feet on, you know, on the snow, or now as just on the sidewalk, just bringing my full attention to the sounds around me as I'm going for a walk anyway. And then just the things that we do daily, like brushing our hair, brushing our teeth, having a bath, washing our hands, putting on lotion, just bringing that sort of full attention. Just choose even one where you'll bring your full attention to that moment. Or maybe it's the first sip of tea or coffee in the morning, or that first couple of bites of a meal. Maybe we can't stay mindful through the whole meal, but can we really bring our attention to that taste of that first bite of food, and the sound of it as we chew it, and noticing how it's swallowing, and as we prepare a meal, maybe just really noticing the brightness of those carrots and thinking about the farmer and the sunshine and the rain, instead of just going through and multitasking and being in the past or the future, where I tend to go a lot of the time. It just brings my attention to this moment. What is there in this moment that I can really appreciate? And what Joanna was saying earlier, you know, to notice what I can and cannot change. There's something so soothing to me about just bringing my attention to this very moment, because in this moment, it's actually manageable as I'm putting on lotion, or as I'm peeling those carrots, or laying in bed, just really noticing the warmth of the blankets, or that nice smell of soap when I'm washing my hands or my hair, that sort of thing. And even just, you know, when I'm listening and talking to my loved one or others, you know, instead of always sort of thinking about the next thing I'm going to say, can I mindfully listen to what the other person's saying instead of feeling like I have to have a reaction? That's been really different. I've been just doing that a little bit in the last month, maybe. And I feel this difference from my son, who picks up on the energy that I'm not trying to cut him off or come up with an answer, that I'm just kind of holding a space for him to be heard and listen. And I see that with everybody. It doesn't just have to be with our loved ones. People desperately want to be heard. So those are just different ways that we can apply mindfulness to our lives. And just throughout the day, checking in with yourself. Am I holding tension somewhere? And breathing into that place where I'm holding the tension. Like right now, I just noticed as I'm talking to you, I'm really stiff. I think I'm thinking about too many things, about the time. Do we have enough time and instead I just like, there's some tension in my back. Okay. Take a breath, Lee, and just be here now with you now. So that's some of the things I hope that, you know, kind of demystifying what mindfulness can be, and how we can just do small ways of bringing mindfulness to our own lives just by being more present. So Joanna and Amy.
So starting to, you know, putting it all together. So we're talking about health and mental health, and we're talking about staying strong. So physical health, we all looked at what we need to tweak. Calm, talking about our mental health, and now connected. So those friendships and their social relationships. And it's interesting because I know myself, it's always, oh, I don't have time for connections, or I don't have time for friendships. It's not important. But again, so many studies show that strong social connections are absolutely crucial for our own health and for that of our families, our health and our mental health now and especially over long term. But some true confessions here. I was talking with a friend. Has anybody here found that their circle of friends or their social circle over the past year has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller? Can anybody relate to that? Yeah. So I find now I have maybe one or two friends that I feel really get me and I get them, and I don't have to explain what I'm kind of going through as a caregiver on top of the pandemic stuff. And I do have a friend who's in a very similar situation, and it can be really wonderful to connect with her. And I find these days my social life is I really don't even have a lot of energy for Zoom things, but usually every week or two I do go for a distance walk with a friend, and part of the criteria is she's a caregiver in the same boat, she's willing to wear a mask like me, she's willing to stay far away from me, and most of all she's got those ice cleats. Anybody have them? So we can go walk beautiful places and not slip on the ice. So what do you do about that? I'm thinking, and all the things I used to do, I don't, the choir and work outside the home and all those things, I don't have that anymore. So it's shrinking more and more and more. So what do you do about that? So something to think about. One thing we can do is really pay attention to how we feel when we're with people. And I think so that's what I've started to do. So I want you to think about when you're with someone, and it could be virtually, or it could be you see them in person in whatever strange way. How do you feel afterwards? Do you feel listened to? Do you feel like it's reciprocal? Do you leave at the end where you feel lighter? Or is it that you feel drained and you feel, you feel drained. So I want you to think of right now a person that you do feel good around and you feel listened to and you feel you get each other. And you can just write down your name. You can do this privately, write down their name. And if you haven't spoken to them in a while, I want you to write down something you're going to do this week or next to get in touch. So maybe you'll give them a phone call or a text or ask for a walk. And true confessions, I have a friend I adore who's not a caregiver, who I haven't spoken to in a year. And I felt really guilty that I had checked in with her and contacted her the other day, and we're going for a walk this week. So I want you to think about, because this is, again, so much of our health study, to think about who's that person, who's your person that you want to connect with, and just write down for yourself their name and how you're going to connect with them. If you can just take a second to do that. And just a couple of other things about connecting. And I know several of you have said you do things for neighbors, or you do things for church groups, or you do things to help each other. And again, research shows that we feel good and it boosts our health and mental health when we help others. So that's always, if you have a neighbor that you know is alone, and I know a lot of you do that and know that that does so much for them, but also for us. And then the third thing to think about as caregivers is reaching out to others for help. And sometimes people do want to be involved with our families and don't know how. And just to give an example, a little while ago, my daughter was really struggling and was really, really anxious, and we were feeling pretty overwhelmed. And I reached out to a family friend who knows my daughter, knows us really well, and said, she loves to text. If you could kind of beef up that text conversation, that would mean the world to us. So my friend was thrilled because it was something tangible she could do. They were texting each other. And then even nicer, a few days later, my daughter got this package in the mail from this friend, and it was an adult coloring book with markers and things, and it was quite beautiful. So always keeping in mind the idea of helping others and asking for a little bit of help. And I just want to do one more plug of, again, the idea of novelty and, happiness. And I just know at this point, I can't handle any more Zoom conversations, and my social circle is getting like this. But there are some fun ways to connect, and we're going to be giving you some articles in the email following for Partners for Planning about, can you plan one little fun thing with a friend? And they gave examples of Can you go online and maybe find a movie or a concert that you're going to watch with a friend? They'll watch at the same time and you'll text each other, or you'll have a virtual dinner where you're going to sit down together, order takeout, have your computers open and talk to each other. You may have already done this, but I find I did that in the beginning and it's all dried up. So we're starting to do a little bit for, again, the novelty, the happiness, the idea of looking forward to something on the weekend to avoid that feeling of Groundhog Day with things getting smaller. So just some ideas about connecting.
Thanks so much for that, Amy. Those were really, really great ideas. And the power of connection and support, and how important that is to our well-being. So sometimes, despite the very best self-care, so all the things that Lee, and Amy and I have shared with you in our teaching today, maybe so far none of that is working. And you may still need to get some help. So when do you go for mental health help? So this is the P, the psychiatric and the help model that Lee reminded us about earlier. And if you can remember back when Natasha spoke with us about signs of when your loved one may need help, and she had that sort of that continuum, that arrow. So these are actually the same signs that we all sort of need to look out for within ourselves. So it's thinking about those feelings that you might be experiencing, like worthlessness, disrupted sleep, significant changes in appetite, really persistent sadness that make it difficult to get through the day. In the context of COVID, I think it can be kind of tricky to distinguish what's sort of a reasonable response to a difficult situation. We are all probably feeling a bit more sad and worried than we normally do, just given the current state of the world. But when might there be, a bigger issue going on? And I think one key question you might ask yourself is, how are the symptoms I'm experiencing? And whether that's worries or anxiety or, low energy or sadness, irritability, fatigue, changes in appetite, are any of those symptoms impacting my daily life or my functioning? So for example, is my lack of sleep making it really difficult, to either do my work, to care for myself, to care for my loved one, or is my low mood making it really difficult for me to connect with my family? Maybe I've been feeling, sad or irritable for months now on most days. And that's starting to impact my relationships. Other people are noticing it. So maybe the things that used to bring me joy that I'm still able to do in the context of COVID, reading, cooking, doing yoga, maybe I'm finding those things are just no longer bringing me any happiness. So it's important to look out for when things are causing you significant distress, or interfering with your ability to sort of carry out your everyday. And when you and when you think that might be the case, or when you're maybe even just not sure, the best person to really bring those concerns to, and to have a discussion about it, is your family doctor, who can then, refer you on to somebody if it's appropriate. And I think it's really important in those scenarios, when we're uncertain, to make sure we bring that up, not to wait, for it to get worse, and to acknowledge that other people in your life may be noticing those too, those signs or those symptoms too, and they can be good people to talk to and to ask. I think this is you, Lee.
I'm really glad you explained that, Joanna, because I also find that when I was getting really burned out, that it wasn't like it was one day I felt okay and then the next day I didn't. It's so incremental, and it's kind of sneaky almost in a way, as I get more and more progressively needing to maybe get some additional help. So to just really, we know, it's better an ounce of prevention maybe, if we really do feel like it's that we're noticing that we're not quite being ourselves, to talk to somebody that we trust, and start with our family doctors too if we feel like we need more help. So I didn't really realize that almost until I was at burnout. So I just throw that out, that this is, again, as you said, Joanna and Amy, a really challenging time. But look at how creative everybody's been so far in the chat, and so those are those three pillars we talked about today: being strong, being calm, and connected. And so I just really want to make sure we save our last minutes to talk about next steps. So I'm just going to ask you to reflect upon these questions, and you've already done a lot of this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. It's just, you know, is there small ways that you can be strong, think about being strong, and in all the ways that that means, and calm, and then even reaching out with some of the suggestions that you have been of being connected. And I think also being connected is being connected with myself. It's not, you know, it's really great. I'm reaching out more to friends I haven't for some time, but I also need to sometimes just be quiet and connect with myself and just say, hey, Lee, what do you need right now? Like I would to a good friend, and listen for that answer. So
Thanks, Lee. I just really wanted to say a huge thank you to all of you for creating this really incredible community. You know, you've shared your ideas and your experiences with us each week. You've asked, you know, really thoughtful and insightful questions. I think you've inspired us all to try and make this course the best we could. And we've really learned so much from you and are so grateful for your participation. And I wanted to say thank you to our team. It really does take a team to pull this course together. To Katie, who's not here today, but has been with us in all the previous weeks, for being our behind the scenes tech support, making sure our polls work, creating our course website. And Sabrina, who's doing our tech support today, but who also takes notes of all the incredible sharings each week. And to Tiz, who I know many of you have connected with, who manages everything course related behind the scenes, and who register everybody for the course and summarizes and shares our feedback, play such a key role. And Yona, who many of you know, who led this course and this project, and actually 2 other courses at the same time, one for healthcare providers and one for self-advocates, who really does bring her knowledge and experience as a sibling to all the incredible work she does. And then, of course, I want to say a big thank you to Lee and Amy, who have helped co-lead the sessions, but who also work behind the scenes for hours each week, bringing their, you know, their perspective and wisdom as caregivers to make this course so meaningful and engaging. So sorry for the long-winded thank yous, but I just really want to acknowledge everybody, and that I feel so fortunate to be part of this team. And I very much hope to see all of your faces.
And we have to thank you as well, Joanna, for being our leader in terms of pulling everything together over the last 6 weeks. And thank you to every single one of you who've shown up and given this time to yourselves to learn something and connect with other people. So let's stay in touch. Please, if you're involved in our research, we would love to hear what you've learned from the course. If you don't know what I'm talking about with the research, just email Tiz and say, am I in the research? What is this? And look for the research in your mailbox from Megan, so you can complete the final survey and help us understand how the course has benefited you. That's right. And remember, as we start to think more and more about vaccines in the coming weeks, now is the time to talk with your doctor. And then we have some Q&As we've posted about vaccine questions and answers, as well as a video with Bill Sullivan that's on our HCARD COVID website. So we'll include those links again for everybody. Take a look at them. And if you find that you still have more questions we haven't answered, just shoot Tiz an email, and we'll see if there's some resources we can help share with you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
So much.
Thank you.